My secretary informed me that a woman was waiting for me in my office after the intercom awakened me up. I cleaned my face and walked to my own office and contemplated how much I detested the city and its inhabitants. Working on the 17 levels below me, I seldom ever spent time there. My secretary, Colette, entered without knocking. I was shocked to see her, because I was now only a figurehead residing in my penthouse with nowhere else to go. Despite her appearance of importance, the woman appeared uneasy in the large space. She introduced herself as June Parson from Social Services, and although she was attempting to maintain a casual demeanor, she was uncomfortable and unprepared for my setting. June handed me a letter and said that she had a case involving 2 children and a mother who had attempted suicide. She discovered the letter close to the mother, and I recognized the first words, "My dear John." The penmanship immediately brought to mind an incident that occurred 11 years ago and altered my life. I recall that morning. Evidently, a damaged water line on Chiswick Road resulted in a severe traffic bottleneck, and I was about it. My secretary startled me by coming into the office an hour and a half late, reprimanding me for leaving my phone off, and told me that I didn't want to meet with Tony Jordan since neither he nor his brother had been attempting to contact me. Understood how to manage contracts or maintain client satisfaction, Tony told me that there was an issue with Johnson's work and that I had to leave right now to settle the matter with their board of directors in order to stop them from. I despised Tony because I was sure I could manage their company elsewhere, just like I had done previously, and his brother Robert for running the business poorly. But I knew that saying such would jeopardize my employment, Tony said. Since Simon Johnson had resigned and his nephew Paul Johnson had taken his place, I would board the noon flight. I was extremely disappointed because Tony said the Johnson account was more important than the theater preparations I had established with my wife Sally. Crucial, I informed him that I had a commitment to Sally, but Tony said she would comprehend the significance of it. Even recommended that because I wouldn't have enough time to get home before my trip, I call Sally to pack my belongings. His office recalling how, just after graduating from college, I had begun working for Henry Jordan when the business was. While others had failed, Henry, who was still a tiny guy, had saved the firm throughout the difficult economic times. He was a typical person who fixed up surplus machinery and sold it to emerging nations at exorbitant costs. As bankruptcies decreased, he likely kept profits abroad to evade taxes before shifting his focus to. Henry started working as a broker for businesses that sold tools and machinery in Europe, assembling and shipping. Before Henry's 2 sons, Ton, aren't quite younger than I was just 5 years older. Johnson spoke most of the time while Paul only nodded, and Paul's overzealous greeting and his entourage lugging my luggage to the event made me chuckle at his jokes. I thought we had reserved a business suite at the Wall DF because of the waiting limousine. Paul mentioned Simon hoped to see you on. He instructed me to let you know that he would be visiting you on his ship during this trip, but he is still on his globe cruise. We had always gotten along well, but it had always been a business setting, so I was shocked that Simon Johnson wanted to see me. Henry Jordan had a relationship. Why would he want to visit me now that he was retired? When he was in New York, he always stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, but I typically chose less gaudy locations. I assumed the suite was just accessible when Paul informed me that it was the company's usual offering. I couldn't envision the Jordan. After putting me off at the Waldorf, Paul promised to send Petra to come get me, and his brothers paid for a room specifically for me, for supper at around 700, after which he and his companion departed. The situation was becoming increasingly perplexing. Paul Johnson should have been invited to dinner by me, not the other way around. It was 9 o'clock and around 400 morning, local time, and because Sally had the tickets, I contacted our home number to find out whether she had gone to the theater by herself. However, presuming it was approximately 9 p.m., there was no response. In London, I texted Sally to inquire on her enjoyment of the play and who she had gone with. I was still on the phone when Petra arrived to get me, but I didn't hear back from Sally. I left a message on the answering machine stating that I was heading out to supper and that there was still no response at home. Would give her a call the following day. Just before I left, Petra removed my briefcase and put it back where she had chosen it. John Paul wants you to meet him, so tonight's goal is merely to socialize. I questioned his family, and Petra explained what was happening. Once we got in the car, I could tell Petra was considering how. She took a while to reply before speaking. And Paul believes that because you two, you should get to know each other better because you conduct a lot of business together. He also wants you to meet everyone on the. She clarified the Johnson board, but I didn't get anything until I questioned whether Johnson and partners may be thinking about employing me instead of Jordan and Sons, which seemed to be the only explanation for all the weird. With several of Johnson's board members and their wives in attendance, the dinner was well behaved. After that, we proceeded to a bar where some people danced, but I refrained from joining in as I was still experiencing the symptoms of jet lag. As the night wore on and I was the only one up, I became increasingly certain that my notion of ing recruited was correct. Every board member was really kind and put me at ease. Petra remained somewhat close to me, serving as my personal assistant. She discreetly introduced herself and any significant information to anybody who approached me. Information about them at 7 a.m. when I returned to my room in London. My phone had no messages, and the hotel receptionist informed me that Sally had not left any either. I considered. She had been out late the night before I was jolted awake at 11 o'clock, so it was too early to phone her. Morning. Thanks for the breakfast, Petra. I have a board meeting at noon, and then there will be a round of. After Paul and I finish playing golf, we'll fly to SJ's estate. We want to know if you're eager to return to London, as it will rely on what Paul and the board decide on our delays. They trust you, so I'm sure they'll agree with me, but move quickly. I tried calling Sally, the temporary receptionist, but she wasn't in her office, so I didn't want to be late for the meeting. Didn't ask questions, didn't recognize my voice, and didn't know where Sally was, so I asked for Robert Jordan, but he wasn't there either. I called Tony Jordan at the Chicksik office because I was getting impatient, and Tony took a long time to reply, even if I was only seeking clarification on a contract. It appears that Brighton and Robert are meeting with the Carter Industries directors. He took Sally to take notes today. As you are aware, Robert's memory is not very good, so the contract had been concluded last week, so I'm not sure what he was attempting to do, but I wanted to let you know that it wasn't something I said aloud. But when Tony inquired how I might need a few more days to settle the matter, I replied. As I suspected, I contacted Mandy Carter's secretary in Brighton, but it turned out that meetings with Robert were planned for that day, but she couldn't remember them when Petra returned. She advised me to hurry up and prepare for the conference. I hurriedly finished my breakfast and leaped. We started with a number of presentations, and even though we were a little late, it didn't seem like anyone had noticed, and took a look around the offices before arriving at the conference room at almost 1 p.m. I must confess this morning that everyone agreed with everything I said, but the negotiations felt a little pointless. They appeared more interested in whether I was upset. It seemed like everyone was on my side regarding how useless and annoying the Jordan brothers were. Although no one said it directly, I thought they were preparing to make me a big offer, but I was surprised that nothing of the sort happened. After the meeting, Paul, some other directors, and I went to the rooftop to take the helicopter. As usual, Petra came with us and asked when I wanted to return to England. She arranged a flight for me to leave later that day. On the golf course, I called my secretary and Chizik on my mobile to tell her I would stay a few more days. I wanted everyone to think I was still out of the country, but Petra overheard me and noticed my tension. She was worried and asked if there was something wrong. She noticed I was uneasy when I called England, so I told her about my suspicions of a possible problem at home, hinting at personal issues. Petra promised to keep my return a secret so I could catch them in the ACT. If my suspicions were correct, she understood the urgency and promised to handle any calls from England, made sure that no one knew I was flying back that night. She told me that besides Paul, she was the only one who knew about my return and would delay anyone trying to contact me. As we spoke, I noticed Paul approaching Petra, and she suddenly him and redirected him to talk with the other player, which allowed me to make my calls in private. After the game, we went to SJ's mansion for dinner, where I saw it was SJ's daughter Beatrix again. I noticed something was off. I'd known her for years, but she seemed uncomfortable around me that day. I couldn't figure out what was wrong, but I felt like they knew something I didn't. I started to worry that telling Petra about my suspicions might have been a mistake. We flew back to the company's headquarters that same day in the helicopter, and then Petra took me to at the airport. Pet had arranged for someone to pick up my things from the Walder Aoria. The flight back to Frankfurt was quiet, But once we landed, an assistant met me at the arrivals area and directed me to a service phone for an urgent call. John, it's Petra. We had everyone waiting for you on the phone last night after you left. Your wife called, and I told her you were in a meeting with Paul later. I gave them the same message when I called separately. Your wife called again, asking when you'd be home. I told her you were booked on the Saturday night flight, which should work. Thanks, Petra. I'll call them from my mobile later and tell them the same. I appreciate your help. Let me know if anyone calls again. She suddenly cared so much that I booked a room at the No hotel near the airport and found out that they had already delivered the car I requested from New York. The company had an account with the hotel, so it was the easiest option. However, the car was booked under my personal name. Not feeling tired, I decided to swing by my house. Sally's car was in the driveway, and the house was dark. It was just after 4. It's 0 morning. I figured this was to be expected. I called the house phone from a pay phone at the end of our street, but there was no answer. The answering machine picked up, so I called 4 times, but since no one answered, I assumed Sally wasn't home. I left the car where it was and walked to the house. After entering, I checked the place out and saw it was empty. I figured the best thing to do was wait for Sally to come back. I made a pot of coffee and settled into the living room. I hoped the coffee would keep me awake, but it didn't. The loud sound of the Lamborghini engine woke me up a little before 8. It was 12 a.m. I saw Sally and Robert getting out of the yellow car and walking towards the house. Bobby, I'm going to take a quick shower and get dressed. Could you go to the kitchen and make some coffee, please? I need something to clear my head. It was strange that neither of them noticed me sitting in the living room, even though the door was wide open. I guess some people just don't see what they don't expect. Sally ran upstairs while Robert headed for the kitchen. I could hear him rummaging through the cupboards and then calling upstairs. Sally said, "Where's your coffee maker?" "It's on the counter." "I can't find it," Robert replied. Sally came downstairs, saying, "You men are useless without a good woman to help you." She entered the kitchen, continuing, "That's odd. It should be on the counter. I don't think I left it in the—" "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" Sally had entered the living room looking for the coffee maker and finally noticed me. She was wearing only a tiny bra and a thong, neither of which I had seen before. I was just sitting there. I was waiting for my supposedly faithful wife. I thought I was going to punch that idiot in the face. I stood up from my chair, and Robert and Sally froze for a moment, thinking I was still in the U.S. Then Robert reacted and tried to flee. Unfortunately for him, our front door had a tricky latch with a complicated lever. The more he pulled and tugged, the more panicked he became. I slammed him against the door and gave him a beating. It seemed like he didn't even know how to defend himself. Sally was screaming that it wasn't what it looked like. It looked like she was trying to pull me off. Robert, the first, don't think I hit him as much as I wanted to be honest. I'm not a violent person by nature. When he tried to curl up on the floor, I stopped hitting him. I'm sure others would have kicked him while he was down, but I couldn't do it. I turned the lock the right way, opened the door, and shoved him outside without thinking much. I grabbed Sally as well and pushed her out too, slamming the door behind them. I headed to the living room, this time straight for the liquor cabinet. Sally called. I rang the doorbell for a while. From the window, I saw Robert go back to the car and return with a travel blanket, probably to cover Sally since she was barely dressed. Sally started yelling through the mail slot, insisting that it wasn't what it seemed and begging me to let her in. I refused to engage, so I ignored her. Some neighbors had begun watching from their doors and yards. Sally must have realized I was back in the living room, because she started pounding on one of the living room windows, still shouting for me to let her in. Unfortunately, she hit the window too hard. Just as the police arrived, the window shattered and Sally cut her arm on the glass. It seemed like only moments later when paramedics and an ambulance showed up. I guess the police had called them, not me. A policeman knocked on the door and spoke briefly with Sally and Robert before approaching me. After explaining my side of the story, I told him I'd found my wife with another man in my house. The officer noted that the man claimed I had hit him, which I confirmed. I also mentioned that I hadn't touched my wife. Another officer who had been talking to Sally and Robert said that neither of them wanted to press charges and that there was no violence involved. However, Sally had a serious cut on her arm that required stitches and clothes for the hospital. I said that I would provide those, suggesting that her boyfriend could buy her something new. As the Lamborghini followed the ambulance, I added that I needed to call a window repair service and my lawyer. The officers left. I was hoping not to have to see my lawyer again, but he put me in touch with his colleague who handles divorces. She said she would start the process, but couldn't do much until she knew who Sally's lawyer would be. At all depended on how Sally wanted to handle things. I noticed the police passing by several times that morning as I placed Sally's clothes, which I had packed in garbage bags in the garage. I assumed there must have been some arrangement. Between the police and Sally, they probably told her I had put her things in the garage around 4 p.m. Monday. Another police car arrived this time with only one officer. He stayed inside the car shortly after a Ford Transit van, driven by one of the guys from the factory, pulled up and reversed into my driveway. I opened the garage door with the remote and saw what was happening. Sally, with her arm and a sling, got out of the passenger seat along with a woman. From her office, the man and a woman helped Sally load her stuff into the van. I heard Sally try to open the door between the garage and the kitchen, but it was locked. She walked around and rang the front doorbell. John, we need to talk. You're wrong. Nothing happened between Robert and me. Let's talk. You're making a big mistake, Sally pleaded through the mail slot. I opened the door just enough to shove her purse into her hand and then slammed it shut. I had already removed her credit cards and house keys. I watched Sally talk with the police officer who had gotten out of his car. He gave a shrug and a shake of his head. After a while, he pointed to a spot on the ground, probably telling Sally and her friends where to wait. He then walked up and knocked on the door. Your wife wants to speak with you, sir. You can't just leave her outside, he said. When I opened the door, there's nothing to discuss. I've decided to put the house on the market. If it were still our home, she would have been here last night, not with her boyfriend. Tell her that her lawyer can contact mine. They know who they are. The officer returned to the driveway and had a brief but animated conversation with Sally and her friend. Sally then seemed to collapse into her friend's arms, who helped her back to the van. They left, and the officer watched as the garage door slowly closed. He gave a shrug to one of the neighbors who had been watching and then returned to his car and drove off. About an hour later, Petra called. I told her what had happened. I told her what had happened, and she was really sorry. She asked what I was going to do next, and I told her I was getting a divorce from Sally and couldn't carry on working for the Jordans. Petra said I should stay in touch and made me promise I would. She also said that Simon Johnson would contact me and that I should keep in touch with him too so Paul could find me. Paul had already mentioned this. I was curious about why Simon Johnson's visit was so important. I didn't return to the hotel until midnight. I couldn't stand being in that house again. It held too many painful memories. The next morning after breakfast, I called my secretary to ask if Tony was in the office. Said Tony wouldn't be in that day, and asked what was going on. I told her everything. She was really upset by the news. I think she was crying. She said Tony had hinted he might resign. When I returned, I felt like he was staying away from the office to avoid being there. When Ione didn't show up, which was strange, I thought he'd enjoy seeing me go, especially after I'd fought with his brother Robert, who was one of the company's directors. There was no love lost between us, so nothing made since. The whole situation was confusing. First, my trip to New York. Tony had insisted I go, but when I arrived, everyone at Johnson seemed surprised to see me. There had been some late deliveries, but they didn't seem too concerned. Then there was Robert chasing after Sally. He's usually dated young women, but Sally was at least 5 years older than him and nearly 10 years older than his typical partners. Maybe they'd fallen for each other after working together for so long, but I doubted Robert would do that. I went to the office to pick up my personal belongings. While I was there, I wiped the hard drive on my company computer and laptop, but only after copying everything to disk. I handed him my resignation letter, which my secretary had prepared for me, directly to the personnel officer. While I waited, she arranged for my final salary and bonuses to be deposited into my bank account immediately. The accounts department was hesitant at first, but they changed their minds once they realized who was resigning. Almost everyone in the office helped me move my things to the rental car or came out to say goodbye. I'd left my company car securely locked in the garage at the house, wanting to ensure I received everything I owed to me before returning. That was practically everything. I stayed at a hotel for a week while I looked for an apartment. I started looking for an apartment. The house sold quickly because it was in a good neighborhood and I priced it to sell fast. I was taking a few months off to think about my next steps, and I was still hoping Johnson do make me an offer, so I didn't want to commit to anything else too soon. As for Sally, I saw her a couple of times, and both times we ended up having a pretty heated argument. In fact, both times I called her a little cheater, and she reacted pretty angrily. We couldn't have a civilized conversation. I was surprised she didn't move in with Robert right away. It wasn't until several months after I kicked her out that she did. I'm not sure where she stayed in the meantime, but the guy I hired to watch her said she moved in with Robert right after our first big argument in the lawyer's office. The situation got so intense that they almost had to call the police. Sally Probably realized then that there was no chance of reconciliation. We had a big argument when we signed the divorce. Paper Sally was wearing a big winter coat and seemed uncomfortable, my lawyer. And I sat across from her as the details of the settlement were read out after she signed the papers. They were placed in front of me. Just as I was about to sign, she asked if I was sure I wanted to do this. She said there were some things I needed to know. I interrupted, asking my lawyer if I had heard correctly. Before she signed, she asked if I was really sure I wanted to do this. She said there were some things I needed to know. I interrupted, asking my lawyer if I just heard a cheer. I said something, and Sally got really angry, calling me names. I quickly signed the papers and left without saying another word. As I mentioned, I didn't want to get into a shouting match with her. A few weeks, or maybe even a month after the divorce was finalized, Petra called to tell me that Simon Johnson was going to be in Southampton that weekend. I made plans to meet him at a hotel in town. After the usual pleasantries, Simon and his wife chatted with me about their cruise. I had a feeling Simon was up to something. Even though he was just a long-time client, he acted like an old friend, and we exchanged condolences over Henry's death. He expressed regret about what had happened between Sally and me. He said he was sorry he hadn't acted sooner, but he had to honor Henry's request. That's when I knew he had been avoiding the main issue. Things became evident as we entered the room. She welcomed me with an embrace and a kiss on the cheek before handing Simon a briefcase. After that, she and Simon's wife departed. Once Simon opened the briefcase, he remarked, "All right, John Leeton. Get to the point. What did when Henry took the firm public and didn't offer you any shares?" I wasn't sure how to answer. "Well, it was his company, and he could do what he wanted with his money," I responded. "But you helped him create it. From what I know of Henry, you probably went the extra mile for him more than once." I didn't react, figuring you'd get to the subject soon. "Right." I didn't realize that Henry owned a major portion of Johnson's through offshore holding companies. The same businesses also have a large stake in Jordan. I was quite riled, yet I felt it was better to keep silent and listen to what Simon had to say. "So tell me, what did Henry say when he retired?" Tired, he realized his time was limited. He requested me to attempt to keep his boys in check, but since I wasn't on the board, there wasn't much I could do. I have to confess, Henry did that on purpose. He anticipated the lads to damage the firm within a year and didn't want you to be engaged in any of it. He was afraid they could attempt to blame you. You know that if a firm falls due to mismanagement, its directors can be prohibited from holding further directorships. I acknowledged. He felt the youngsters would deplete the company's resources. In a nutshell, these documents, according to Simon, make you the primary stakeholder of those holding corporations. Yours now. He took a moment to process it before going on to describe these articles. "I was meant to keep all of Henry's numbered bank accounts until Jordan and Sons broke. But considering what I believe, you should have them now because of what the brothers did to you. Did you know that according to the brothers couldn't fire you because of their father's will, but I think they set you up?" "Oh, I see." Simon leaned back and stared at me, saying, "You're a very wealthy man now, all your money, and Sally to make you resign. I'll assist you in determining how to lawfully get the money back into the nation, as it's in offshore accounts." My mind was racing after hearing from some imaginative accountants that Robert Jordan had wooed Sally and destroyed my life in order to force me to leave the firm. "So I can see why you're upset." Simon went on to say that Henry never genuinely. He had DNA testing done years ago because Marta, who thought the boys were his, had a tendency of cheating on him while he was gone. He initially believed that one of them may be his biological son, but he later realized that they were aware that he wasn't their biological father and disparaged him behind his back. "Henry frequently said that you were more like a son to him, so he agreed to give you all of his money because he believed the lads would ruin the business, but you want them to fail, and destroyed exactly as Henry did." "What about the workers at Jordan's? They'll be laid off now?" "A large U.S. corporation is assuming control of John Johnson's contracts with Jordan's in the coming week or two, and soon after that some. The London Stock Exchange will see a massive dump of Jordanian stock from international investors, which will lead the price to. When the price drops, the appropriate bank authorities will be alerted, phone, and a group will intervene to purchase what's left of the business after the banks. You guessed it, Simon will be the main shareholder and head that group." Grinned, "But because nobody will notice, you may renegotiate the contracts with Johnson's. Perhaps in the end you'll. Why don't you extend an invitation to me to join your board? A Johnson's and Joe Redan's merger may possibly place me on the." "John, what do you think of Johnson's board?" I don't understand why Henry didn't quit the firm right away. He must. You spent almost every day with Henry throughout the years I knew I would be dealing with legal challenges to the estate. His latter years, indicating that he was somewhat eccentric and believed the family would accuse you of having too much control over. They spent a lot of time and money looking for him because they thought he had concealed money abroad. Anybody who looks into where your money originates from will discover that it came from me since Henry left everything in my care. Additionally, they can't accuse us of insider trading because I'm no longer with Johnson and Partners. Both for the last 6 months. As of right moment, I am the chairman of Simon Johnson Associates and the C. The Jordan brothers have announced that I am now in control of operations in Europe, leaving Paula in command of the U.S. branch. Bankruptcy and are prohibited from serving as directors of the firm for 10 years. They have made many attempts to re-enter the business. I felt horrible for the twins, Sally, but I have people watching them. Their marriage didn't survive more than a year. Had with him. I assumed they had met at work after I expelled her, but the person I hired to keep an eye on her claimed they seldom ever. I doubt Robert ever paid child support when he left her, and I kept wondering how long they had been together. Sally may have become pregnant immediately after our breakup since Robert had been seeing her pushing A year after I pushed her out, I learned that Robert was living in Spain with some dubious people. Characters I researched, and since southern Spain is close to Morocco, I'm certain he was utilizing speedboats to travel about, which is why I informed the police. As for Tony, he works as a bus driver in London, which isn't the best employment. After learning of his infidelity, his wife filed for divorce. You can probably imagine what transpired next and who informed her. Since Tony's mother Martha has moved in with him, I feel a bit bad for her because she no longer receives money from Jordan and Sons. Since I last heard from her, the true question is whether Martha felt bad about cheating on Henry, residing in council accommodation, and most likely receiving social benefits. Perhaps she is working on the side. I apologize for that. It was a tough idea, but in my opinion, things moved swiftly once we got rolling. Paul and I developed a fantastic team. Both of us received training from elite experts. Simon Johnson coached Paul, while Henry Jordan trained myself. In the years that followed, we consolidated our businesses and bought several others, becoming a big multinational. Now that Johnson and his wife have settled in, Paul and I have stepped aside and let our personnel to do the majority of the job. He purchased a lovely home in England next to mine, and, although his daughter and I spend time together, we're not arranging a wedding. We've both been there before. Paul, Petra, and I are on the board, and we all went smoothly, and Petra eventually married Paul after his wife passed away in a vehicle accident. After considerable hesitation, Paul and Petra reunited after an accident years ago, and Paul joked that Petra merely married him. You may be asking why I live alone in this penthouse, but it's because she grew bored of waiting for me to pop the question. Has been absent from my life ever since, but now I simply accept each day as it comes. I'll take advantage of a good financial opportunity if it presents itself, but life must be about more than just getting money. I just got a letter from a social worker, so I read it fast and used the intercom on my desk. Colette, can you find? Ask Beatrix to come here as quickly as possible if she's in the building. Yes, sir. I believe she's at her office. We got to my door a little while later, and I gave her the letter. I had seen her earlier and hadn't seen her go. She read the letter wicked and, without uttering a word, took a big breath, indicating that she was disturbed by what she was reading. Did you know about this? She asked. No, I didn't. What are you going to do? I have no other choice here. Asked June Parsons. What hospital is she in? She replied, General Hospital. When I went to see June last night, she said, slow hell. What's her condition? They didn't know anything about her. She had taken a variety of medications, and when we came home we attempted to pump her stomach, but the doctor stated it would be some time before we could determine how long she was unconscious. We now have additional information, and last night I placed the children with an emergency foster mother who is looking after them today. I wanted to discuss your options with me. I need that note returned, and the coroner will need to view it if she dies. Get me the general manager of Slow General, and I'll create a duplicate for myself and return the original to Miss Barson Colette. The hospital is on the line immediately. Hi, do you recognize me? I have a question for you. How much is over budget? After a short break, I proceeded quite successfully at your hospital this year. The situation is that you have a patient named June Sally Crawford. June Parsons is her last name, Sally. You have a Sally Crawford, a patient who is in danger of overdosing on drugs, will receive a check for $1 million from your hospital. You won't receive anything if she doesn't. I anticipate that no costs will be spared and that no corners will be cut. I think we can all agree that I don't trust bureaucrats. So are you certain they're doing everything I ask of them? That managing hospitals nowadays frequently entails attempting to reduce expenses, though occasionally I have my doubts, providing a Sally should receive the best care possible thanks to the £1 million, agreed? Well, let's go pick up my kids, I suppose. Mrs. Crawford states in the letter that they are your children, so I don't see any problem with that. Why are you here, June? Entrusting you with their care going forward, but I will remain accountable for them until a judge rules differently. Don't fear not. They'll receive excellent care, and I'll keep you informed about their health. With your consent, we'll take them too. Until we learn more about Sally, we can easily drive to my house near Swindon, where there will be plenty for them to do. Highway, and roughly an hour to see her. I'm happy you feel that way, Mr. Crawford. I believe that if we maintain the status quo, the children will feel more at ease in June. Miss Parsons accompanied me and sat in the rear of my car when the three of us went to the underground parking lot. Limousine for the drive. Our first stop was the hospital to see Sally. The doctors didn't say much at this early stage. Then June took us to the foster home where the children were be, and I waited in the car while she was chatting with them for about 10 minutes. June motioned for us to come, and she came in with Kai and Gator. This is your uncle John. He'll take care of you until your mom recovers. June introduced us, and we decided to use the title Uncle John until we knew more about Sally's condition and how the girls would adjust to me. Hi, girls, this is my friend Beatrix. You can call her Ambi, I said, the 10-year-old. 1 year. The girls looked at us with some suspicion. You'll stay with me at my country house while your mom gets better. There. Our horse is to ride in a pool there. He added, where's our mom? Can we see her? Kay asked. Sheck, not going to die, Gator added. The doctors are doing everything they can to help her, I said. The girls, they still seemed unsure, so we suggested going to the hospital to see how hard they're working to help her get better. They may not let the children see her, but we're sure they'll let these kids see their mother. We dropped June off at the station where she'd left her car, and then we headed to the hospital. We dropped her off at the station where she'd left her car, then headed to the hospital. As I'd expected, the rules had been adjusted to allow the girls to enter the ICU. Surprisingly, the girls didn't cry. They were quite resilient. He also noticed a strong resemblance to me. I decided to skip the DNA test. The journey to Will Year was pretty smooth. Once the girls felt comfortable in the limousine, they started exploring everything inside. They were excited about the idea of watching TV while traveling down the highway. As we were getting off the motorway, G turned to me and asked, you're our dad, aren't you? I didn't see any reason to deny it. Yes, I am, but I didn't know until today. If I had known, I would have seen you more often. We know that Mom told us last week that she never told you about us. No, I didn't know what she was planning. She told us that she was bad to you and didn't tell you that we were your daughters. She said that you Gator explained that her other husband was our dad. Maybe one day your mom will explain why she did what she did. Do you think she'll get better? Kay asked. I really hope so. She doesn't want to get better. She wants to go to heaven. G said, I can't believe that. Not with two wonderful girls like you said. Mom is tired. She works too hard, and there's never enough money. Well, now there will be enough money, and she won't have to work anymore. Do you see that little house? I said as the car was pulling into my estate. When she recovers, I'll ask your mom if she'd like to live in that house. The girls can ride horses and swim in the pool at the big house. They were amazed when they saw the mansion where the car had stopped. The household staff came down to greet them. I knew they had prepared everything for the girls' arrival, setting up a guest room with 2 twin beds. B and I were somewhat forgotten as the staff took care of the girls and led them away. That's a surprise, he said. I wonder why Sally never told you they were yours. Sally must have gone to great lengths to hide her pregnancy from me, I replied. Now that I think about it, she might have been showing signs during our last meeting when we signed the divorce papers. She was sitting hunched over in a long coat on a warm day. I remember thinking it was strange for her to wear that coat. I wonder why she hated you so much. And after all, she was the one who cheated on you. What did she expect when you found out she was with that jerk? You'll have to ask her if she survives. The girls adapted well, and the staff went out of their way to care for them too. Weeks later, I entered Sally's hospital room. She had finally woken up with a clear mind. I was thinking about her the night before. I'd placed a letter she'd left in her hand and waited for her to wake up. I must have fallen asleep while waiting. because the first thing I heard her say was, "Hi, John, I'm sorry." I looked at her and saw her holding the letter I. Asked her how the girls were doing. "Well, I left them at the pool this morning. They're keeping my staff on their toes. They're lovely girls, and a real credit to you. Will bring them here this afternoon. Thanks, I'm sorry I kept them from you. It was a dumb move done out of anger. Once I did it, I didn't know how to undo it. I can't think of a worse way to handle it than the way you did. I was desperate. You know, I owe thousands of pounds that I can't repay." Robert left me with so much debt by making me sign for everything. I think he married me because being bankrupt he couldn't get credit. Sally, you don't have any debts now. I've paid them all off, and those lenders you borrowed from are out of business for good. You found out about them, right? They showed up at your apartment demanding money while one of my workers was collecting up the rest of the females. He told them to come back later, and they were in for a huge surprise. Why won't annoy you anymore? Why are you being so polite to me? The last time we saw each other was a long, long time ago, Sally. I was still upset. Then now it's just a terrible memory, though it did upset. It'll take me a while to forgive you for keeping my daughters away from me. I'm sorry. That's all I can say for now. As for the females, they know we're buddies now. If you agree, we'll bring you to my place tomorrow. I've arranged for a couple of nurses to take care of you there once you're fully healed. You and the girls can reside in one of the houses. That way I'll be able to visit them regularly. I'm not going to take the girls away from you, and I'm not going to take their mother away from them. They love you very much, maybe even more than me. I'll make sure you never keep me away from them again. I'm sorry. That's all I keep repeating, but I honestly regret all the mistakes I've done. There's one question I need to ask you, Sally. Why did you become connected with that person in the first side? Don't you think that was a mistake? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times over the previous 10 years. I'm not sure I have a clear response. He worked on me extremely carefully over a long period. I know why he did it. He told me when he learned the girls weren't his, it didn't take him long. They looked so much like you, they couldn't fire you because of their fathers. Well, yet they were convinced you had some of his money. They felt you may use it to create your own business if you lose your job. They had private detectives following me. Did you know Robert charged nearly everything to the we didn't have anything, no house, no vehicle, nothing. Robert and Tony were arrested for embezzling, leaving the business. But I believe you were responsible for the law's development without my assistance. However, Tony and Robert were receiving enormous incomes. I'm not sure what they did with all of their money. I believe they both enjoyed gambling on the stock market, and Robert spent money at clubs like water. Had already spent everything, and when they made the decision to fire you, they hoped you would disclose the Locati Zero and where you believed Henry had concealed you. I was upset with you because you didn't explain why you dated that man. Robert was really cunning. He was lied to me the entire time, leaving me small clues that allowed me to overhear things that made me. It's difficult to describe, but I heard him discussing with Tony that you had girlfriends everywhere. I'm sure there were reasonable business costs for nightclubs and other things, but the little remarks were. Over the phone, Robert told Tony things I shouldn't have heard, but I did. If you knew Robert was lying to you, why did you suggest spending so much money on a new female in Rome or New York? I couldn't believe it. If I had faced you and it had been true, what would I have done? I guess I could have left and divorced you since I wasn't as powerful as you were. D have ended up unhappy, but as time went on, I began to question myself. And then that play came along, which is why I wanted you to take me to watch it. When you phoned to announce you were heading to New York, Robert was there. He overheard our talk and broke down in tears. He reassured me before driving me home to pack my bag and take me to the airport. We didn't return to work. Robert said that I was too distraught, so we spent the afternoon by the river talking with Seidel. After that, I believe I slept with him that night after taking him to dinner and the performance, even though I know it's not an acceptable justification. If I hadn't been drinking, I doubt I would have done it, but it's safe to say that at the time I was rather depressed, and after everything my ostensibly loving spouse had just done, I believed he had gone to visit his. I continued to think that girlfriend until Robert left me, at which point he told me all he said, saying that if I hadn't arrived, I knew it was improper to sleep that day, since they were going to give you anonymous pictures of Robert and us together. I don't want to hear that about Robert. He was selfish and not very good in bed. He was terrible at practically everything except striking me, but by the time I returned, he had gotten rather excellent at it. I was upset when I discovered you and Robert together, but I'm not sure why. However, I thought you had set me up. Petra informed me that you wouldn't be coming home until Sunday, because she was certain you had a. I now realized that my girlfriend in New York was mistaken, But at the time, I believed you would set me up to be caught. I was pretty upset throughout the divorce, and I suppose I was upset with myself as well. I had intended to tell you about So, on the day we signed the divorce papers, I wanted to sign them first and let you know before you did. About the infants, so that it wouldn't appear like I was taking advantage of them. If you wanted to win me back, you could have just. I should have known then that you weren't cheating on me if you had signed the documents, yet were still upset with me. Instead of being so angry about what I did, you would have called me a terrible term, which I truly. I'm sorry, furious, but there's no use in saying sorry. What's done is done, and there's nothing we can do about it. Will you ever forgive me? I may forgive you in the future, but I will always remember that there are two amazing young girls are involved, and we must consider them. I promise to be friendly to you, and I hope you will do the same. Likewise, you are their mother, and I will be their devoted father. Please don't bring any boyfriends close to So, there won't be any boyfriends for a very long time, Sally. She ultimately got better and lived with the daughters in a modest home on the estate until they left for college. She away from cancer a few years ago, and I think the medicines she took prevented her from fighting to the fullest extent of her abilities. I suppose I don't love Beatrix, but the overdose caused long-lasting harm, and I eventually got married to the person I love. I believe we care deeply about one another and enjoy spending time together, much as I like Sally. They were more like soulmates. It's love, but it's not the same as what I had with Sally. The twins are now married adults with their own kids. He is referred to as grandma, a job she believes she is too young for. Am I glad that it's a combination of yes and no? I wish I had stayed with the lady I loved throughout my life. Every Sunday, she waits for me at the cemetery gate as I place flowers on her grave. Life continues on,